Well, good morning, Surf City. Welcome to the Walking Together podcast. Even if you're outside of Surf City or if it's not morning where you're listening to, we are glad you've tuned in. Thank you for hanging out with us for the next little while. We don't know how long this episode will be, but we're sure it's going to be a good time. Today we're going to be talking about communion, or the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, or whatever you want to call it. But we will have some thoughts on that later too. So, but I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Jared. We're going to do a little bit of backstory on what communion is and why it's important and why we are instructed to do that as Christians. So, Jared, you want me to go ahead and cue up my 5-minute timer, or you want to?
I would just like to say I'm also here with Jordan.
Hi.
And Nick.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if I can make it 5 minutes.
I didn't forget y'all. I was jumping right into it.
You were jumping right into it. Well, let's real quick. What do you call it? You said whatever they call it. What do you call it?
I tend to call it communion. Sorry. That is somehow louder.
Went down the wrong tube.
Oh, man. Coffee is causing all kind of problems this morning. So I tend to call it communion.
All right, Jordan, what do you call it? Primarily.
Communion.
I typically say communion.
Nick?
I'm sorry to not upset you guys, but I say communion as well.
Okay.
Well.
If you're listening, you can call it Lord's Supper, communion. Either way, we're talking before.
Are there any other names for it other than Lord's Supper or communion?
I don't think we would say receiving the Last Supper, so.
No. But I have heard it called that.
Yeah.
By people. But there was only one Last Supper.
I thought you were about to make
because it was the last.
Mine was last night, but
Are you gonna have another one tonight though?
yeah, but then it won't be my last one. Yesterday's won't be my last one.
That's right.
It changes every day.
The Last Supper, referred to by in the Bible, is Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about.
That was referenced in the Olympics as well.
Or so they say. So we're doing a little bit of background because of the importance of communion in the church. We were left of the church's two sacraments, baptism and also communion. And so we're talking about the importance of, there's so much to dive into, I think, but in order to catch us up to where we want to get today, they said they were giving me a 5-minute timer to, I'm going to rely on Nick a little bit here too to catch us up. If you read the account of Jesus and his disciples and leading up to their Passover meal or their Last Supper, you can find that in John, I think 10, and also Luke 22. I think it's in Matthew as well. But if you know a lot about the Old Testament and look in the book of Exodus, you'll see Exodus chapter 12, where it talks about the Passover, and I believe through 14 through 20, you can read about the things that are included in that Passover meal, the things that are required. The Passover was a celebration of God's deliverance of the Jewish people from Israel. And if you remember, there was a lot of plagues that were sent, and the 10th plague, I believe, is when they put the blood over the doorpost so that the firstborn or the children would be spared. And then there's this, obviously, this Exodus that happens, and so we're sort of caught up to, in a sense, the New Testament, where we see Jesus with his disciples, and they're celebrating this Passover meal. Some pretty interesting things that I think are worthy of noting about that meal is Jesus sent out Peter and John to go and find a place for that, because if you remember, right before he was to be killed and people were looking for him, they had to find a place where they could receive that meal together, but they didn't want everybody to know where they were going to be at. So Peter and John go out, they find a place, they have to get all the elements in place, which included the wine that was there. They had to secure a lamb to be eating. They had to get all the necessary elements, and they basically took this meal together to just as a remembrance of God's deliverance of his people. It's pretty crazy to think about they would actually get this lamb that had to be consumed by every piece of the lamb had to be consumed. There couldn't be anything left. And one thing I didn't mention as we were just talking before that is I had written down that at the exact moment that Jesus was crucified and was killed, it was at that same time that all the lambs would have been slaughtered for that meal, for the Passover. And so it was pretty significant how that happened. So as he sets that up, and it says in verse 14 that the hour had come. Jesus and his disciples reclined at the table, and that hour meant the sundown, which was exactly when Passover began. And so it started at the exact moment that God had instituted, and it was pretty cool. So we find ourselves there in this room with Jesus and his disciples about to receive the Last Supper, or whatever, the Lord's Supper together. And it's from this point, and what we also see written later in the New Testament, that we're given instructions and we do something in remembrance called communion. Now, feel free to that was a very, very quick summation of that. But Nick, you mentioned that you and your family do a meal like that with your family. You were talking a little bit about that, what it looked like.
Part of the reason we do it, and part of the reason communion came up, well, we talked about baptism, and we realized baptism and communion, like you said, are two of the kind of ordinances that we're given to do as believers. And we just got the opportunity to celebrate communion at night of worship, and just, kind of refreshing my memory on it. I always ask why. And when you go back to the Passover and what they were doing and how long it took, and that what the food represents, the lamb and the bitter herbs and the bread, it was unleavened bread because it represented them being ready to leave, to exit Exodus, and the reason it was unleavened is because it's easier and faster to make bread without yeast because you don't have to wait for it to rise. Mm-hmm. And so when you're learning that there's actually significance to all this, you're not just doing it because your grandma did it, or whatever the reason may be. I think I started to realize, maybe if we actually sat down and kind of reclined with each other at a table and had a meal together and spent time with each other and remember and talk about some of these things, which is why in Jewish tradition they do it every year and it takes a long time, is because, we kind of rush through things as Americans. And I didn't want to rush it, so... And me and Chrissy were just sitting around talking about all this and talking about why we celebrate Christmas or why we celebrate Easter. And in America, it's really focused on the wrong things. Mm-hmm. And it's all about things that point to the world more than to God. And I'm like, well, what if we start a new tradition that we're going to sit down and we're going to have a Passover kind of style meal. It isn't going to be exactly those foods, but if we sit down and have a meal together and talk about it and do communion together, then I think that would help our kids understand the point of Christmas and Easter. Mm-hmm. So we started doing it 2 or 3 years ago, and now we look forward to it.
Yeah.
And that was just, a lot of times stuff don't cost you anything if you don't take time. Mm-hmm. If it don't require something of you, you don't value it.
Right.
So if you take the time to actually learn about why they're doing what they're doing, then when you go to do it, it means more than just a cracker and juice, right?
Yeah.
And so... just being a red-blooded American, it's hard to do because you don't really grow up that way, and culture don't really teach you to think that way or operate that way. So you
Right.
kind of got to fight against it.
Yeah.
Well, and also the preparations that you go through to make that happen. So you get the herbs, they would have to find the right animal that would be sacrificed. That couldn't have blemishes on it. They would literally sing Psalm 11 or whatever, or 13 through 18. They would dip the bread into the sauce and do that. They would, this whole thing went on for hours.
They would have to slaughter the lamb at daybreak, at twilight, so it won't
later. Yeah.
You imagine getting up and having to do that, it cost you something.
Yeah.
And then having to cook all of it and not being able to eat it until sunset, it's an all-day ordeal. It ain't just like, hey, we're going to sit down and have a double cheeseburger and
And it was
say a prayer.
It was and it shows that there were a dozen people that would sit down and do this because you couldn't eat a whole lamb.
Right.
I ate that 12-ounce ribeye over at low tide, and I'm like, woo, getting full.
Yeah.
So you do the same. I know you do.
Oh, yeah.
I think lamb's a leaner meat.
Is that harder to eat though if it's leaner?
It's less filling, I think. It doesn't have as much fat.
More chewing.
I don't know.
It needs more sauce then.
So
That's why they make mint jelly.
What?
You don't
For the
put-
lamb?
Yeah, you never put mint jelly on lamb.
I'll be honest, I have never had lamb.
Dude,
in my
lamb
life.
chops, mint
I've
jelly.
had
lamb
veal
chops?
in
Really?
that lamb.
No,
No, that's
Deer.
no, that's venison.
Wait,
Veal?
no,
No, that's
veal,
baby
veal
cow.
is baby cow.
Baby cow.
That's right.
Yeah.
I've had lamb before, lamb chops. Sorry.
I don't know, man.
Anyway,
Anyway,
but I have not had mint jelly. I know that.
Dude, mint jelly is
jelly goes on biscuits, and mint does not sound like it goes on biscuits.
Mm.
it's odd, but it's good.
Yeah. I'd be willing to try it. I'm not saying I wouldn't.
Yeah. Lamb chops are weird. They're it's like a stick and then it's like a little ball of meat.
Is it like those those skewers at the Chinese restaurant?
A little bit.
Teriyaki chicken on a stick.
So part of the
Anyway.
reason we're even telling you about this is just to help you understand. I know everybody's from different maybe backgrounds or practices of communion or the sacraments, but the whole point of them doing that was to remember. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me."
Yeah, they had the Passover meal for remembrance, since each item of the Passover meal signified something about the Passover that you had to think about each thing.
These herbs are bitter because it reminds us of the bitterness of slavery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This bread is unleavened because it reminds us that we got to be ready to go. This,
Yeah, so the communion of body and the blood, it's not 10 parts or whatever, but it's you're supposed to think about. It's not just picking up and eating a piece of bread and taking a shot of grape juice.
Right.
It means something.
Right. I like to think of it. I went to a funeral this Saturday, and that's how I kind of picture approaching communion. Right. It's a solemn moment because it's a serious moment. It's something that we're instructed to do, but we're also remembering the death of Christ. And so in a way, I feel like you approach it like a funeral. You don't come to a funeral, ready to throw down and party, which is how the Corinthians were doing. Instead you come with memories of this loved one. And whether you're thinking on them or listening to other people tell their stories about with that family member or friend, or it's a serious moment where you're reflecting on the past and honoring that person.
Well, all the way back to the Old Testament, any judgment required death, right?
Right.
So this killing of this animal in order to cover sin, right? And Hebrews says it never took away fully.
Right.
But the same thing true, like when Jesus, when he was there with the disciples and they're taking that, he knew that he was about to be that Passover lamb.
Exactly.
And what I heard a pastor say one time was, if you think about, y'all been to Disney World before?
Yeah. I've been to Epcot.
I've been one time, second grade. I remember very little about it. But, like Walt Disney, memorable, he's got all these things. I don't know if it's true that he actually is still frozen or not. I remember hearing that as a
there's
kid.
no doubt he is.
Yeah. But, like you got these statues and stuff to remember a person. It's crazy. Like Jesus didn't give us art or imagery to remember him. He gave us a cup and bread. And that's how we remember Jesus.
Right.
And so, when he says, do this in remembrance of me, I mean, every time we see that cup and him, it is to reflect back on what? The shedding of blood to cover sin, his shedding of blood as the Passover lamb for our sins. I mean, it's truly like a gospel presentation. I mean, that's what it is.
Absolutely. That's why I have, I think that's why all the rednecks started drinking sweet tea and having biscuits at dinner time. Because sweet tea looks a little bit red, and you got to have the biscuit for the bread. So,
are you trying to say rednecks are the most spiritual of the Americans?
I didn't say it. You said it, but
Is that what you're trying to imply?
Anyway,
what about all them fancy people up in Napa Valley?
They can still love Jesus too, but it ain't no sweet tea and biscuits.
Dude.
So
Anyway.
I think we've covered the like background of communion pretty well. And if you have any other questions about it, feel free to ask Jared or any of us.
Or Google it.
Yeah, Google's a pretty good resource for
It is. But I think what would be helpful too is to kind of explain why we do what we do at the gathering, because we have, I think everybody does know it at this point, but we have Baptist roots, and so we do communion pretty Baptisty. But there are a lot of people here at the gathering who have come from Catholic background, from Methodist background, from charismatic backgrounds. I mean, all kind of different backgrounds, and they all do communion or Lord's Supper in a slightly different way. So why do we do it the way we do it here?
Well, before we do that, let's talk about those ways real quick, just so people know if they hadn't seen them.
So one way, it would be common cup. So like with
everybody shares the same cup.
Yep.
Is there a rule on how much you can drink from the common cup?
It's up to the person's hand who's pouring it.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't hand it to you?
No,
I've
you
actually
pass it through the aisles. I've seen. I've also seen them come up to the front.
You've seen them pass it through the aisles?
I've never seen that.
Is it ever real wine in there?
Oh yeah.
Is there ever past the dude and he's just like
What
one
if the
shot the
cup
whole thing?
runs empty? What's the refilling process?
Well, hopefully they bless some more.
Refill on aisle six.
The cuppeth runneth over.
I have not experienced that. I've only drank out of the one where you come up to the front and they hold it for you.
And they wipe it and turn it. I've done that.
It's like a silver chalice or whatever cup, and then they wipe between every person that they use the same handkerchief.
You wipe it and then you do quarter turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you give it a little bit of time for the germs to dissipate.
So
Well, that's what the alcohol's for.
that's the common cup. And then the bread would be what?
Well, really, that has always kind of depended. I mean, I've seen it be white bread. I've seen it be naan. I've seen it be pita.
I'm saying by torn off.
And that method too. I mean, pre-broken, people tearing it off as they come up or as it's passed around. Because I've seen literal loaves
passed around.
Right. I've seen pita like already in like a offering plate.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have intinction where it's done together. So you dip the bread in the juice or wine. And then even the difference between wine and juice. You got all kind of different breads that have been used. And then you have what was invented not too very long ago, the combined cups.
With the cellophane, like the
Yeah.
disciples did it,
Yeah.
where you tear the plastic off,
That's right.
get the
Get that
little,
little wafer.
perfect circular disc out.
Yep. I still don't know what that is. I still legit believe they're styrofoam.
It does styrofoam.
It doesn't do, it doesn't ever break down, so
Right.
they just feed it to the Christians for us to break. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's a bunch of different methods, but they all have
It's like the dissolvable peanuts packaged in wafer form.
these mints aren't minty at all. But yeah, so here at the Gathering, we've done it a few different ways. There for a long while, we did the little cups, and then we found out that one box was expired right before we were getting ready to serve them, and they had run out of stock.
So then we
went.
That was
and
during
got,
COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah. So then we
COVID got communion.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah. So then we went and actually bought because we have a special device that fills up the cups and everything. And
Did the Catholics do the common cup during COVID?
yeah.
They did?
Still.
Yes.
Dude, that's
Yeah.
hardcore.
Yep. Yeah. Jesus' blood was no
Jesus'
match for the
blood
COVID.
can't-
That's right.
Can't have COVID.
That's right.
Can't get it.
So
And then this 2-3 weeks ago, Nick led communion for Night of Worship, and we did.
Sunbeam and Welches, right?
It was
It was grape juice. It was some kind of fancy grape juice. from
That was a
Publix.
fancy bottle. That was a glass bottle of grape juice.
I have never.
You did
seen.
sunbeam bread or bimbo bread?
No, it was pita bread, naan bread, whatever you want to call it.
Nan bread?
Flat bread. It wasn't unleavened. It's just easier to tear off and eat, and
It's easier to get people. The logistics make it easier.
and when we did that, I tried to explain, in 1 Corinthians 11, when it's talking about order of worship and Lord's Supper, I was trying to find it while y'all were talking. We'll get into why the worthy unworthiness in that part of the chapter. But part of the like in all the examples y'all just gave, there's actually significance behind why people practice it the way they do.
Oh yeah.
Because Paul even talks about, that it signifies. So when we have one loaf of bread, it signifies unity of the body.
Right.
And when we're breaking it together. So that's why some people do it that way. Same thing with the common cup. Like it signifies us being a family, one body of believers together. So that's why some people do it that way. I don't think the way we did it at Night of Worship was what we were talking about, was just we didn't use a common cup. I had a tray of little cups of juice and bread in a basket, which the deacons helped break the bread just because it took a little bit longer. And something I wanted just to point out to people and help people realize is like, don't rush through communion. Don't.
Right.
And we are one body that have this common belief. And when we take a piece of bread and when you are serving somebody else, it helps you get in that mindset of Christ-like mindset.
Yeah.
And when you're breaking it for somebody else, it just helps, which is why part of the reason they do the Passover meal is it is this multi-sensory function of it. You're evoking not only a memory, but taste, smell. That's why, we talked about bitter herbs signified how slavery was bitter to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, when you're breaking a piece of bread, it helps you remember Christ's body being broken for you. when you drink the juice, it's God's blood being poured out for you. So there is some significance. I don't think, if you didn't know all that, when y'all are listing all these examples, it's just kind of like, well, I think everybody just has preferences and does it how they want to, and there's actually significance behind it. It's not,
Right.
I don't think the intent is, and even when Paul is talking to the Corinthians, because like you said, Kyle, like they were getting drunk, people were going hungry, people were eating too much. And so Paul's having to write this letter to correct them on like this, you're missing the point in why we're even doing this.
Right.
And so the point being, it's Christ's body broken for you and blood poured out for you. So I don't think the focus is necessarily how you practice doing it, what bread you choose or what wine you choose, or if you put it in big cups or little cups or one cup, or, it's the point of us coming together as a body of believers to remember, right?
Right.
That's the focus.
Right.
So don't get hung up on the
method
right.
behind it. One thing we didn't say, who is it for?
Yeah. So that's a phrase that I think those only familiar with it would know, but called fencing the table. They call it that because we are told not to take it in an unworthy manner, right? And it's for people who have accepted Christ, people who are saved. Otherwise, you drink destruction upon yourself, right? That's
Which is
that
why
was
you
in Corinthians
Yes.
as well, right?
right.
So that's why it's for Christians, because otherwise you're condemning yourself as a non-Christian.
Which is also important as a pastor who is administering that.
Yes.
Or whoever it is, because I know people that do it for guys in prison and stuff like that. Like if you're facilitating and leading that, it's important to say like this is for those who are believers.
Yeah.
Jesus. Two things I think that communion does. One, I think it shows unification. We're all gathering around the same thing. If you imagine a person who's outside, who would not call themselves a Christian, sitting in a Christian service and see everybody kind of doing this thing together, it shows the united body of Christ.
Right.
The other thing it does, which we'll talk more, I think, in the second episode, but it brings purification.
Yeah.
What is the first thing that we are instructed to do before we receive communion? I mean, are we supposed to take it without self-reflection and examining
ourselves?
So we take that time to go, hey, where's our heart? Where have we sinned? Where do we need to repent? Is there a person we need to go to ask for forgiveness? I mean, there's clear examples of that. So not only does it bring unification, but it brings purification for the church body as well, which I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Jordan, did you guys do communion in Panama?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't
Just
know.
curious. Just
I
didn't
don't
know
think
if there
so.
was a...
Well, yeah, they did. I don't know. I can't remember.
I know I didn't do it a whole lot growing up. Primarily whenever I started getting involved at what I would call my home churches, we did it quarterly there. But before then,
They called it
middle
Holy
and high
Dinner.
school.
Santa Cena.
Holy
Oh.
dinner? you said?
Holy Dinner.
That's another thing I hadn't heard.
Me,
So we learned a new one.
Holy Dinner.
I make a motion. That's what we call it here now.
We will now partake in Holy Dinner. I'm like, what?
Do I get a second? But yeah, no, that's interesting. But, well, cool, y'all.
Nick, what's your thoughts? You seem to be pondering over there.
How do you feel about Holy Dinner, Nick?
I feel pretty good about it. I was just reading a little bit.
We were boring you. You guys are boring me. I need to read and stimulate my mind.
No, I was reading 1 Corinthians chapter 11, which talks about the Lord's Supper, and I even said at night of worship, every time I go to do communion, one of my first thoughts is, I should probably do this more. When you start reflecting on who God is, who Jesus is, what he's done for you, not only how far he's brought you, what his broken body's done for me and his blood poured out. Because without that, you can do all the Passover Seders you want. You're never fully covered. And then I think about all those people before me. I think that's why Jews probably have such a hard time with Americans, is because we seem unappreciative and arrogant almost, and just you don't realize the sacrifice and the surrender and what it takes, and when you do that, it just makes you value it more. And so then I realized, well, then you when you start to examine yourself, I don't think we do that a lot in American church. There's not a whole lot of examination. There's that, which goes to is it in Matthew? The verse, just a little leaven will ruin the whole thing.
The Pharisees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just convicts me to be better about that, to not only examine myself, but I think about love and how to love people, and it's more loving to lay down your, even sometimes, I think we have a lot of acquaintances, we have a lot of friends, but there's not a lot of people you're willing to sacrifice yourself for, to say, I care more about you than what you think about me, and I'm going to tell you something you don't like about you because I love you. And a lot of people don't do that. And I think if we got better at that in church, then we wouldn't have to work so hard at convincing people that don't come to church why we go to church.
Yeah. Well, and as our human nature, as we're created, and we live in a fallen, sinful world, it's easy to point fingers at the Israelites and be like, dude, how did you not see all those miracles? And still keep turning away. You didn't see the waters part? And then
you literally didn't see the fire in the sky.
Yeah, you got all these things. And what do they say? Write it on your doorpost, carry it with you when you go, because what? You'll be so easy to forget. And then, we sing that song, prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Then we look at the New Testament, and Paul tells them, I can't believe how quickly you've deserted, right. And so the key word in that is remembrance. Right. It is easy for us to forget.
Yep.
We're so just, our attention is diverted in so many directions. It's easy for us to forget that when we do the Lord's Supper or communion or whatever you call it.
Or holy dinner.
Holy dinner.
It reminds us. It should ultimately remind us and point us back to Jesus.
Right.
And remembering is a good thing.
Because wasn't that, that's the charge that John brought against the church of, Laodicea, right? In Revelation. You forgot your first love.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're listening to this later, and you're convicted to do communion, and you're at home. You open the fridge.
Yep.
No grape juice, no wine.
Do you have sweet tea and biscuits?
No matzo crackers.
Thank you.
All right, so what do you do?
Go to the store. Grab you some. If you can't go to the store, then...
Go
ahead.
We were talking about
use
Mountain Dew and Doritos. Mountain Dew and Doritos, right? That was the conversation last time.
I think so.
So what I would do if I couldn't go to the store. Well, let's say I go home right now, and I'm trying to be as real or in the moment as possible. Let's say I leave here and go home. I don't think I have any grape juice at home. I think I can find a cracker or bread somewhere, but let's say it's a Cheez-It. And the only thing I got in the fridge right now is water, orange juice, milk, and seltzer water.
Does that at least taste like grape?
It's black cherry.
That's probably the closest thing you got right there.
I'd go
So-
with that one.
What I'm going to do is say, Lord, you know why I'm doing this.
My heart
Right.
behind this.
Right. And I'm going to take this Cheez-It and this black cherry seltzer water, and I'm going to remember you. I don't think he cares.
Yeah.
I heard a story of a missionary who got put in prison for preaching the gospel in these foreign countries, and he was getting like one meal of whatever, ever how long it was, and it was so important to him. He would take part of his meal. He'd take a little bit of the water that they gave him, and he'd put it aside in his cup until he had enough, and he laid out. I can't remember what it was. It was, for some reason, like potato things came to mind, but he'd make these little potato or rice papers thing. He'd lay them out and let them dry out, and then he'd take communion there in his little prison cell. And it's like, the heart behind it. Like,
Yeah.
it's not about having, if you have the right amount, it's great, but the importance behind it is, why you're doing it.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, fellas, time to land the plane. Thank you guys for joining in on today's Walking Together podcast episode about communion. I hope it's been informative and helpful, and I hope you were able to learn something from it. If you have any questions about communion, feel free to give us a call, ask us, let us know, because we'd be happy to answer them. But I do hope it's something that we all begin to take a little more seriously, because it is such an important thing. It's one of the last things that we were commanded to do, and to remember Jesus. So I hope you do it well. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. But again, thank you for joining in on today's podcast episode. If you would like to hear more episodes, you can do so by visiting gatheringsurfcity.com/podcasts. If you have any topic suggestions, we are all ears, and you can send them to me, Kyle, at podcasts@gatheringsurfcity.com. Shoot me an email, DM us on Facebook, Instagram, whatever you got, and let us know a question that you just have burning inside of you that you would like for us to answer. Also, please like, share, subscribe. If you haven't done those things, leave us a review and 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of your other favorite podcast players, and that would be extremely helpful, because then more people get to hear us, and I think that would be cool. Anyway, I think that's all I've got. So you guys have a great rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and we will talk at you next time. Later, y'all.